Good afternoon. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch. I know I did. I just want to introduce myself. I'll be presenting together with Kaitlyn. My name is Marcia Gliss. I'm a semi-retired RN. My husband had Parkinson's disease, so I've been there. I understand what you guys are going through. Since I've retired, I've started facilitating a caregivers group in my town, and I find it to be very rewarding, and I get more from them than they do from me. But I hope that today's presentation will help you to cope better and to understand what your loved ones are going through.
Right, hello. And so my name is Kaitlyn Roland. If any of you weren't earlier in the session, I did a bit of yoga. And so now I'm wearing my other hat. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Victoria, so north of here, up in Canada. And I'm doing some work around understanding some of the cognitive changes that happen in Parkinson's and how we can better support care partners in managing and supporting those changes in cognition. So how we're going to run the session today is we're going to talk a little bit about cognition and dementia, some of those differences in terms, and talk a little bit about the changes. And then we'll pick a couple topics to focus on. And we are, again, quite a large group, and so we'll break out into smaller little discussions a little bit later in the session. So just to get started, talking a little bit about what is cognition. Well, cognition really refers to kind of the brain processes in which we discover and understand the world around us, okay, and how we apply knowledge from the day-to-day. Okay, so it's this big term about how we use and process information. So both information that we have already and new information like maybe that you're picking up today. Okay, so, and that includes a lot of different things. So information can be around perception of facial expression. It can be around thoughts or ideas that result from thinking. We can talk about judgment, evaluation, problem solving, decision making, intelligence, so abstract thought, understanding, and learning. All of those things encompass cognition. Okay? And so when there's a change in cognition or cognitive ability that is severe enough to interfere with daily life, then we have something which is a diagnosis of dementia. So dementia is a term for a diagnosis, which means that two or more areas of cognition have to be impaired enough to impact day-to-day function. So things like memory, communication or language, attention, reasoning, judgment, and visual perception. Okay, so dementia is this broad category of brain diseases that are often long-term and progressive, okay? And it affects the ability to think and remember, right? And so part of that, cognition. Things that can happen along with dementia include things like impulsive behaviors, depression, anxiety, so changes in mood, changes in speech, delusions, hallucinations, psychosis, wandering, restlessness, memory, okay? And so there are varying degrees of severity. So we can have changes in one or two aspects of cognition that make life a little bit more difficult, but maybe don't severely impact your day-to-day life. So something like mild cognitive impairment. And then something more severe can bring us into mild dementia, moderate dementia, or severe dementia. So dementia is kind of this broad umbrella term that groups together a range of symptoms that are attributed to a variety of causes or diagnosis. So something like Parkinson's disease, when there's an associated dementia, falls under that umbrella. But so does something like Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal dementia, when there are very different aspects of dementia, and they look very differently. And that's because changes in cognition really result from different brain cells' abilities to communicate with one another. Okay, so when our brain cells cannot communicate normally, thinking, feeling, and behavior is affected. So in a disease like Parkinson's disease, a protein known as alpha-synuclein is affected, which can impact something called dopamine. And dopamine is a transmitter that relays a message across the synapse. So it's how the brain communicates. And the message of dopamine can be coordination, as in muscle coordination, but it can also be attention and reward and focus. Okay, so that's the message dopamine carries in the brain. And so when there are changes to something like alpha-synuclein, then the dopamine message isn't relayed properly across the synapse and it's not received by the receptor. Okay? So that's in Parkinson's disease. In something like Alzheimer's disease, it's a different protein. It's a tau pathology. Okay? So different things are affected. So it's not just different cells that communicate differently in different types of dementia. It's also different parts of the brain. Okay, so when we think about something like Parkinson's disease, I'm going to go for a walk again. Thinking about something like Parkinson's disease, and we think about the impact on dopamine. Dopamine is created and used in a group of cells called the basal ganglia. And so the basal ganglia is kind of in the midbrain around here. Okay, so when there are impacts to cells that communicate within the basal ganglia, it kind of impacts things like working memory, visuospatial function, reaction time, executive functioning. Okay, because that's kind of the area that we're working with. When we think about something like Alzheimer's disease, which is more hippocampal, we think about more learning, okay, in the lower part of the brain. So different areas of the brain and different types of cells that are miscommunicating are different types of diseases. So these different types of changes in cognition and non-motor symptoms can impact a wide variety of things. Things like memory, executive functioning, attention, bradykhrenia, which is slow thinking, visuospatial function. So that's like the ability to judge a map, to know your way home on a map, to be able to lift your foot high enough to get over the curb. Language, hallucinations, sleep, and then some ideas around exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to maybe pick 2 of these topics and talk about them in more detail. And then if we have more time, we can add another one. So is there topics out of this list someone would like to hear more about? Someone shout it out. Okay, well, we already did the cognition versus dementia, that piece. So we'll do sleep and slowed thinking. Okay, so we'll do sleep and a visuospatial, and then we'll kind of weave some bradykhrenia in there. Does that sound good? Okay. So I'd like to talk about everything. So let's talk about visuospatial. So what we're going to do is we'll talk about these and then we'll break up into smaller groups and have a little bit more time for discussion. Okay, so visuospatial function. So visuospatial and executive function. So executive function is like the conductor of the brain's orchestra. Executive function helps us to plan, to process, to sequence tasks. So visuospatial and executive functioning are key indicators of changes in cognition in Parkinson's disease. Those are the things that we're looking for. And visuospatial is the ability to perceive, process, act on visual information. It's our spatial working memory. And so things like knowing how to get home from the grocery store. We have a visual map in our head of how to do that. And if we go a different way, say we turn left 2 blocks earlier, to be able to update that spatial map in our head to know how to still get home. And that's something that can be impacted in Parkinson's disease. And so unable to deal with changes in that spatial working memory, so updating that information, and that can lead a lot to disorientation and maybe some wandering and confusion. And so there's also trouble in remembering locations. So there's also trouble in remembering where you're going and how to get there and where it is on the map. So knowing that you're going home, but not remembering where that home is spatially located on a map. And how we test for this is, if you look at this doesn't work. The little black square over on the right-hand side, you can see those 2 lines. And so lining up those two lines and seeing where they fall on that chart at the bottom, so deciding whether those lines are orientated 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, being able to judge that perception of how those angles are compared to the bottom, that's kind of how we test for visuospatial dysfunction. And so this can lead to wandering or lost behaviors in people with Parkinson's. It also increases risk for falls because it's we have an inability to judge distances, so navigating a map, but also knowing how close the chair is when I go to sit down, how close it is behind me, how high the curb is when I'm going to step up onto the curb, knowing putting one foot in front of the other, arms, hitting things, hitting doorways, being able to walk through a doorway and not hit the side of the doorway. All of those things are visuospatial dysfunction. So that can increase risk for falls. So we're going to take a few minutes, and what we're going to do is we're going to get you to find a partner. Because we are such a large group, it'll give you guys a chance to have a bit of conversation. And we're going to do a little Kripalu yoga exercise called a communication exercise. And so you're going to find a partner, and you're going to sit with that partner, and one person is going to be the speaker, and one person is going to be the listener. And the person who is the speaker is going to talk uninterrupted for a set of time that we'll kind of monitor up here. And we encourage you to use I statements. So I notice, I'm aware of, I need, I recognize, I'm experiencing. Talking about if you're dealing with any of these visuospatial changes or challenges or some other non-motor symptom that's really pertinent or relevant to you. The listener is going to listen. They're not going to interrupt. They're not going to chime in. They're just going to sit there and listen and hold the space. And you're more than welcome to have a conversation after the exercise if you have things you want to share. But just for the next few minutes, one person is a speaker, one person is a listener, and then we'll switch. And so here are some kind of questions you can talk about, what challenges you're facing. You could talk about any positives that you're dealing with, tips or tricks you have, or questions you have about management. Okay, so find someone. Yeah. Oh, sorry. To our online friends who are joining us, if you have someone, if you're part of a group or a listening or a watching party, I guess, feel free to join us as well. Find someone on the phone or find someone in the room with you and complete the exercise too. So rearrange your chairs if you have to. I'll give you a minute to do that. And as in Kripalu tradition, the person with the shortest hair is going to speak first. Okay? So take a minute to introduce yourselves. Compare lengths if you need to. Millimeters count. Okay, and then just take a few minutes to introduce yourselves. And then the short-haired speaker, take a few minutes. I'll be watching the clock. I'll let you know when it's time to trade, okay? And so take another minute. And so let that finish, whatever you're talking about. We'll have a little bit more time to discuss afterwards. And then we're going to switch roles. So our short-haired speaker is going to become the listener, however you measured short hair. And our long-haired listener is going to become the speaker. So just let that transition happen whenever you guys are ready. And we'll keep time for a few more minutes. And so there's no need to, address anything that the first speaker talked about. If you want to talk about something completely different, that's up to you as well. So people at home as well, switching roles if you're participating.
Reminder to be calm. Yeah, it helps stay grounded and got nice and volatile. My husband's accident, I went to about a year and a half, 2 years for PTSD. Then it's in Malta, and it's like a blur. Now I'm finding things and saying, when do I do this? Stuff like that. And it's, I've got mostly because I overslept on the counter before I go to bed. But I use Valor and breathing on. I have allergy issues. So, I'll clear that up before I have to speak. So,
And take another minute.
We started late though too. And then there's a break. So they don't have to come back here. They're right here. That's where people downstairs.
So just take the time to let whatever you're saying come to a close. We'll meet back in the large group for a bit of a discussion.
Just trying to let the breathing constantly clear my throat.
So let's come back into the big group. And Marcia's just going to share a little bit about how some visuospatial dysfunction looked for her when she was a care partner.
My husband's driving was driving me nuts.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yep. No? Okay. I would drive with my husband. He would drive, and I would be the passenger, and I would literally drive from the passenger side. I think some of you know what I mean. Braking and, this thing. He had a tendency to hug to the right side of the road and follow too closely, and hit lead foot. And that scared me to death. And how do you tell a 61-year-old man you can't drive anymore? It's very difficult. It's a difficult thing to do. So I kind of cheated by hurrying out of the house faster than him, getting into the driver's side. So when he came out, he had no choice but to sit in the passenger seat. So it gave me peace of mind knowing that we weren't going to kill anybody and get to where we had to go. And it bothered me so much that I even had our ophthalmologist test him for depth perception, because I said, there's something wrong, it's not normal to drive like this. And they tested him, and yeah, his depth perception was fine, but as Kaitlyn explained to me, it was the process in his brain. What he was seeing and what his brain was comprehending were not the same. So I think you can understand what I'm saying about, how scary it can be, and those little things that you do in everyday life that can have an impact on that.
And what about some of you? Does anyone have anything they want to share on this? Something that you talked about, something that came up for you with Marcia's story? Share as the group? Yeah. There's someone with a mic coming around. Thanks.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't feel like you don't have to use it. My family was following us one day in the car that he was driving, and when we got to the house, the children got together and said, Dad, we want to individually take you out for a drive and decide whether we think you should drive, because following you home was not a good thing. And so it kind of got taken out of my hands. Yes, it was wonderful.
That's a hard conversation to have.
Very hard, but the kids kind of took over and took care of it.
Okay, thank you. I kind of had an epiphany with my father because we live in a two-story house, he does, and he insists on going upstairs, and I see more and more bruises on his arms. And then my mother says that he fell last night, and he fell again a couple months ago, and he says, oh, I just ran into the door, and my left foot didn't go where it was supposed to. I keep hearing that story, and so my epiphany is that he is far enough along, and he's just not accepting it. And we were listening to him thinking it's not that bad, but in fact, I think it officially is. So.
My husband has a lot of these visual, spatial problems, and I know I was talking to her I realized it just yesterday to explain some of them. We get to the hotel, and my husband's spending a lot of time in the bathroom. Then finally says, I can't open the soap. The plastic is covering it, and I can't open it. So I had to go in and look for the little line and tear it open and handed it to him. And he said, well, how come I didn't see that? Then he was going to take a shower, and then finally he comes out and says, the water's broken, or the shower's broken, we'll have to call him. And I just put my hand and pulled. It's one of those, you pull it out and then you turn it. I just pulled it, turned it on, and he's like, I must be getting very weak that I can't even get that turned on. And you just feel so sorry for him. You know, just these easy little things that he can't see or he can't figure out how to do anymore. And it's just as hard for him as it is for me.
It's harder for you, actually, because you see what's going on.
It must make you feel helpless to watch that. And it's things that they have taken for granted for so long that all of a sudden it's harder. That's a real loss.
How is everyone settling in to their hotel rooms? And okay. Any more little stories around that? Oh, yeah, just something.
Back to the driving issue, I did have help with mine. My daughter handed her keys to my husband to drive a short ways, about 1.5 miles down a road that parallels ours. We're on it all the time, and you know, like 4 or 5 times during that time, it's just 25 through here. Oh yeah, you know, I'm back off. And while she was handing him the keys, I was shaking my head no behind him, and she didn't see it. But when we got back, I said, don't ever do that. She says, don't worry, Mom, I never will. So I was able to use her name, asked her first, can I have your permission to ask Dad for the keys? And I didn't get the keys, but just a promise not to drive. And he felt ashamed because that's the man's job, is to drive and to care for his wife in that way. And then going to support groups, we went to one, and there was a man talking about a trip he had taken all over the United States. And the other people were going, you drive? And, well, the difference in him and the other men in that group and the other people with Parkinson's was he didn't have a spouse or a significant other to tell him that he couldn't drive anymore, and he went thousands of miles. But that meeting was an epiphany for my husband. I said, did you notice the looks on the other men's faces? You're not the only one. So the support group really helped to assure him, this is the disease. It's a nasty part of the disease, but it's not you. You're not stupid. You're not slow. It's just the disease.
I had it a little easier. I was trying to get my husband to quit driving, and of course he thought he could, and I knew it had to come from somebody else, so a neurologist that we had suggested that he go to OHSU, and there's somebody that can track, you know, his response, and she told him he failed. And he was just like a little boy. He says, I failed? I mean, it just hurt him so bad, but since it came from her, it was a little easier than me telling him. And I just wanted to say one other thing. We had some people over that stayed overnight with us, and my husband always liked to make coffee for them. He no longer can make coffee. The person stood right by him, and he was just putting lots and lots of coffee. He had no idea how much, and that was something he always liked to make coffee, you know, in the morning for people. So he can't do something simple like that. He can't measure, see how much it takes. Okay.
Just a side note, Ginetta and I's husband, neither one of them drive any longer, but they both carry their keys in their pocket. You cannot get the keys out of their pocket, so.
As long as I don't use them.
So let's switch to sleep. Let's talk a little bit about sleep. This one's fun sometimes. So sometimes sleep issues can happen in Parkinson's disease because of something called hypocretin cells are lost. And hypocretin cells are associated with alpha-synuclein, which is that protein that helps to power the dopamine message of attention, coordination, reward. And so some studies just show there's up to a 45% decline in these cells in people with Parkinson's disease. And sometimes these sleep things are those things that you look back once you get the Parkinson's diagnosis and you look back and you said, oh, right, that's been happening for years, right? It's something that is maybe associated with the earlier stages of Parkinson's, maybe before the tremor or the common motor symptoms show up. And so it's also really highly associated with some dementia in people with Parkinson's disease. So there are a few different ways in which this show up. There's sleep-wake cycle disturbances, so inability to fall asleep, stay asleep, sleeping at different times of the day. REM sleep behavior disorder is a big one. And so that's when people act out their dreams during their sleep. So often, in the rest of us, when we fall asleep, our muscles almost are paralyzed when we get into a REM sleep. REM sleep is the stage of sleep where we do all of our dreaming. And so in people with Parkinson's disease, that normal skeletal muscle atonia is lost. And so they retain the ability to move their muscles. And this can often lead to bed partners getting kicked or hit. It can lead to wandering at night. So in the room, is anyone dealing with REM sleep behavior disorder? Yeah. Another big one is restless leg syndrome. So that's that overwhelming need to move your legs, uncomfortable, there's tingling or itching or burning sensation. It often happens when people are at rest, so when they're sitting or when they're lying down. And this, the pathway that leads to restless leg syndrome shares the common pathway with dopamine. So loss of dopamine often leads to this restless leg syndrome. So anyone here dealing with restless leg syndrome? Yeah. And so that also can be very uncomfortable for a bed partner. So another thing that happens is often some daytime sleepiness or somnolescence that can happen in Parkinson's disease. So we'll buddy up again with our partners. This time the long-haired speakers will go first. You can fight over that if you're still measuring millimeters. And if you're joining us from at home, again, finding a partner or someone to speak to. And then we'll take a few minutes. If you'd like to frame your discussion around sleep, you can do so. Talking about some of the challenges, some of the positives, how you're dealing with sleep issues, things that you just don't know how to deal with. Whatever comes up for you. So then take a few minutes to speak. Short-haired people, you are our listeners, and then I'll cue you when to switch. So go ahead.
The bruises. After my husband died, I actually went and bought a whole new bed, frame, mattress, the whole shop, because it was our bed and my bed. And then I was able to sleep in the middle. Other than that, in the old bed, I kept sleeping on the edge on my left side while the dead fluid all the time.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
My poor dog could never, well, we didn't allow him in our bed anyway. He wouldn't even sleep with us because he would have kicked him off the bed just with us moving around.
Oh, yeah. We have to. Time always goes so fast. Seems like we have 15 minutes.
Yeah.
The visual spatial is good because it got people talking about driving. That's such a huge.
Oh, it's such a, my dad's 90, and I take him to his doctor's appointments. We let him drive to church, which is around the corner, up the block, so it's not bad. And he lives in a small village, and he goes over the bridge to get his meds. But I keep telling my brother, you better talk to Dad. and tell them in advance when you're going shopping that you're going to pick them up on that day and take them shopping. I have visions of him being mugged. And he's hobbling with a walker or a cane. He carries cash. And he's frail, you know, and it's a safety issue. And then he said, I think in January I'm going to quit driving. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. His insurance expires then. And I think it's...
He just probably knows.
Yeah. Because he doesn't
Where
argue.
does he live in New York too?
Yeah, it was about 20 minutes from where I live.
Oh. But he doesn't argue.
No. When I tell him I'm picking him up, okay. You know, he doesn't say, oh, I'll drive. You know, he hasn't driven to my house now in 2 years.
And take another minute.
Yeah, one of the other indicators is we told him we would meet him for Father's Day dinner several years ago. Said they're going to Metzger's Pub on Seneca Street. Oh yeah, I know where it is. I've been there before. We went to Schwabel's. It's not even the same. Metzger or Schwabel. They're both on West Seneca, but they were not the same restaurant. He said, I waited for you and you didn't come on. I said, yeah, why didn't you have your cell phone with you? Oh, I left it home. Because we were calling him on his cell phone. Where are you?
Yeah. And then let that come to rest. And the long-haired speakers will become the listeners, and the short-haired listeners will become the speakers.
Oh, excuse me. I ate too much for lunch.
And again, you can talk about sleep or any other non-motor symptoms that your challenges you're facing. Any positives, any tips or tricks, or how you're managing them.
I was talking to a woman from my church on Saturday, and she has Parkinson's. I picked her up during one of our church functions. I went up to her husband and said, Mary, does she have Parkinson's? She goes, who told you? Nobody. It's help, you know? She's got the blank face, and she moves very slowly. She talks. And so this was a couple of years ago, and Saturday we were talking, and she happened to be right behind me when I turned around. And Larry came up, and she said, because I had saw him election day, and told her that he didn't recognize me. She was always like that all the time. So she prompted him on remembering who I was, and then when I was coming here, and he goes, you know, she has Parkinson's. We talked about this so many times. So he's got some degree of dementia, and she's got Parkinson's. I'm scared of these people. But anyway, he goes, and nobody knows she has Parkinson's. And I think, yeah, Larry, you're living in a wild land because people know she's got Parkinson's. Yeah.
And take another minute, our short-haired speakers. And so let that come to rest, whatever you're speaking about. And we'll meet back together in a larger group. Do you have anything you want to share, or should we ask them?
Let's ask them first. I always interject something.
That would be good, yeah. And so, what does this look like for you? Any challenges related to sleep? Yeah, oh, I know. Timekeeper, trying to keep us on schedule. We'll have a break following this, so more discussion can happen at the break after this noon. Yeah. So does anyone have anything they want to share? Yeah. We have mic people. All right, I'll come around.
Oh, here she comes.
Oh, someone's coming. It's being webcast, so I think the mic is, yeah.
Yeah, my husband has REM sleep disorder, and I've been kicked and bruised and punched and, the works. But a few years ago, we got a Tempurpedic mattress, and it really made a difference. Even when it's not the REM sleep disorder, just the dyskinesia, I feel the movement less in that type of bed. And also, just about a year ago, the head of neurology at UCLA, who we trust implicitly, Dr. Bronstein, suggested melatonin. And it's definitely helped us both. He said you can take even up to 12 milligrams. He didn't think there was any side effect. We're not groggy in the morning. For my husband, not so much falling asleep, but when he used to wake up at 2, 3 in the morning to go to the bathroom, he couldn't fall back asleep. The melatonin helps him get back to sleep, and it's helping me sleep as well. So it's a big, big benefit.
Yeah, that's good.
Does he have any trouble with the Tempur-Pedic getting out of bed? Our chiropractor suggested a Tempur-Pedic. So my husband and I went mattress shopping. And he laid on the Tempur-Pedic and sunk in. I mean, really sunk in. Took 2 salesmen and me to get him out of bed. Well, this was, we're talking about 6 years ago. So they were still just the constant foam. And so that was like, oh, this is off our shopping list because there's no way I'm going to pull him out. So that's good to know.
My partner suggested I share my husband's REM sleep disorder. My husband is a Trekkie, a huge fan of Star Trek. And so he doesn't kick or punch me, but he tends to drive a Starship a lot while he drives. And he fell asleep in the car when I was driving us to Gettysburg, and the whole time I'm driving, he's dialing knobs and switches and reaching over to touch me and then going back to his knobs. And I guess he's Sulu.
That's really great. We had a great story in the last session too about someone who sang in their sleep. So we have a singer and we have a Star Trek ship driver. Anyone else? And it doesn't have to be a story about REM sleep.
So my dad just recently moved in with me, and the couple of things we've definitely noticed is that he has trouble waking up really early. So he'll wake up at about 2 a.m. and then not be able to fall asleep. And then also during the day, it'll be like we're having a conversation, and then I'll look over at him, and it's almost like narcolepsy. It's out. And we get to the habit of we count how many times he falls asleep while we're watching a TV show, and I'm like, okay, Dad, that's number 3, wake up. All right, Dad, that's number 4, wake up. So it's definitely something noticeable with this.
How are you dealing with those early morning wake-ups?
So far, they have not involved me. I'm sure my cats absolutely love it because they think they're going to get fed. So.
We have some questions from our internet audience. First question is, can sleep disturbances include sleepwalking?
Yeah. Yeah, REM
And-
sleep behavior disorder, that can be a part of that.
And how do you adjust space to make it safer for a person who does this? Any suggestions or tips?
Eliminate all throw rugs. Make sure there's no objects between, in the general walking area. Make sure that there's nothing left on the floors. And carpeted rugs seem to help too because they can walk easier.
We also have a suggestion from our internet audience regarding bed choices. Someone from Oregon, a viewer, is saying, my parents use a sleep number mattress with good success, less disturbance for mom being able to adjust one side of the bed with the firmness versus the other.
We ended up buying a pocket coil mattress, the ones that they advertise where you can drop a bowling ball and the other side of the bed doesn't move, and that was our solution.
Does anyone else have any solutions around nighttime wandering and safety, or even sleep safe, home safety in general? Or anything else?
I sell mattresses, and my husband has Parkinson's, and we're needing a new mattress too, and I'm afraid to buy one. But one thing that people should know, sometimes if your husband falls out of bed, there is what they call a low-profile foundation, and it's only 6 inches high instead of a standard foundation, so it's closer to the floor. So when you're buying one, you might keep that in mind. Well,
Clarissa?
yeah.
I purchased snap lights online. It's a nightlight that's actually built into your outlet. You don't have to do any rewiring whatsoever. You just put the plate cover on, and when it's dark, it automatically lights up. When my husband was diagnosed, I put night lights down the hall and in the bathroom so he could see without having to turn on the lights and blind me in the middle of the night. But when he would, kind of waver back and forth, he would hit those night lights and, scrape his leg or knock them out completely, and then he was trying to plug them back in. So snap lights are a godsend because they just automatically come on and they're not protruding in any way, and they're the perfect thing. You can order them online.
And they're are they motion activated?
No, they just
Okay.
come on in the dark.
In the dark, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I got them from Amazon, and I got 6 of them. And they don't come on at all until there's motion about 15 feet away. Works really great. You can walk out. Depends. You can move them around, put them wherever you want, and they can be stationary or they can be movable. So that's another.
Yeah. Another thing to remember is when you arrange your furniture to do it so that it's the shortest walk for them to go to and from the bathroom. Is that they don't have to turn corners, it's straight through, it's easier.
Does anyone have bed rails? Those are a good safety measure too, not only for preventing people from jumping out of bed in the middle of the night in REM sleep behavior and running into a wall, which I've had happen in my clinic, but also to help with bed mobility and getting in and out of bed. And does that work for people, bed rails? Yeah. So that's another one.
Somebody gave us the dimension, and they're built a PCV pipe, and so it's real cheap, and it keeps him in the bed, and his legs are frozen through the night, and so he holds on to it to get him, and then I have to get underneath his arm and do the rest, but it has helped. I'm glad we have it, and it's not big. It doesn't have to be big, but it's sturdy. Part of it goes underneath the bed.
Be careful.
My husband has a big stick or railing that goes from the ceiling to the floor. So when he gets out of bed, he has that railing to pull him up. It's not a bed thing. It's just so he can get up out of the bed.
And then that saves you a little bit in the process. Yeah, good, great.
There's a sleep issue that I didn't see up on your list, and that is sleep apnea. It just seemed to make sense to me. My husband started the snoring thing probably around the same time he started shaking, a few years before I could get him to a doctor, more with the snoring than the shaking. By that time, his blood oxygen at night was 78%. That's brain damage. And I asked the neurologist, movement neurologist here in Portland, I said, is sleep apnea more common with Parkinson's because of the muscles relaxing and all of that, or freezing, whatever they do, the loss of muscle tone? It just makes sense. And he says, oh yes, way more common. Then why are sleep studies not ordered as a standard part of the treatment, so that takes one less naggy thing off the caregiver's plate?
Anyone else in the room dealing with sleep apnea and their partner? Yeah, you are not alone. That's a good issue to bring up. Yeah.
Oh, blood
Blood
oxygen.
Blood oxygen? Yeah. 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 Okay, well, we're at our time. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for everyone who joined us at home on the webcast. We're going to take a 10-minute break. And so feel free to continue discussion amongst each other if you have some unfinished business. And we'll come back at 2:20 for coping strategies and mindfulness with Paula from NPF.